December, so that you can sleep over around 9 o'clock in the morning. We should start.
The former FBI Director James Comey's pleaded not guilty to charges brought against him in a U.S. federal court. It was his first court appearance since being charged last month, with one charge of making false statements and another of obstruction of justice. The BBC's Nomi Iqbal has more.
The hearing itself didn't last for very long, but the impact of what's happening today is very far-reaching. James Comey, the former director of the FBI, being here in court is essentially a culmination of an effort by President Trump to go after him. It was pretty alarming, the sequence of events, in terms of how we got here. Mr. Trump publicly calling for his Attorney General, Pam Bondi, who heads up the Justice Department, very loyal to Donald Trump, to go after Mr. Comey. Donald Trump has long disliked Mr. Comey.
The top story is that 2 students from the University of Fort Hare have been taken to hospital after being injured in clashes with police, during which an administration building was set on fire. That's SAFM News. I'm Greg Khos.
The Meeting Point, Monday to Thursday, 8 to 10 p.m. Only on SAFM.
Our people is traumatized in Overcome Heights. Our kids can't even go to school. They can't even write tests. The situation is so bad. The kids have to sleep on the ground. They're not sleeping on the beds. We can't walk like people in Overcome Heights. Like, we can't walk. We must be scared to walk there.
Every day they're walking with guns, and I can't go work. Every day I cannot go work.
We can work in the community for our children. I must stop my work this morning and I run. And I could tell my son, my colleagues, you think it's right? We must stay like that. Our children can go nowhere. The kids have to sleep on the ground. They're not sleeping on the beds. Our kids can't even go to school. They can't even write tests.
Koketso Sachane on SAFM.
It is 8 minutes past 8. Good evening and welcome to this Wednesday edition of the Meeting Point, this special broadcast looking into and analysing what's happening on the Cape Flats. It is very much a Cape Flats in crisis, and how do we break the cycle of crime and gangs. For decades the country has watched as the crime and the gang situation worsens on the Cape Flats. It has become the norm for us to hear of or live in a reality where children are killed by stray bullets in the middle of gang warfare. In addition to this, we have lived through reports of multiple killings over a few days in various communities on the Cape Flats and surrounds. Cape Town and the Cape Flats in particular is in crisis. On the Meeting Point this evening, we are hosting a 2-hour roundtable discussion on this crisis. Between now and 10 p.m., we'll hear from activists, criminologists, reformed gangsters, and survivors of gang violence as we navigate how, if possible, we can break the cycle of crime and deaths on the Cape Flats. Our dialogue is going to run across 3 themes of 30 minutes each. And also to you listening, you are invited to contribute to each section through your calls and your WhatsApp voice notes. We're also going to be dedicating the last half hour of the dialogue between 9:30 and 10 to an open discussion, reflecting on what would have been shared. This is a special broadcast coming from our M1 studios in Sea Point, meaning we have our guests in lounges relaxing. The need for us to relax as we deal with this very important subject, and we are also streaming via the SAFM YouTube channel, Facebook and X as well. At any point, you're more than welcome to be part of the conversation by giving us a call on 086 000 2032. On the X streets, we are at SAFM Radio. Use the hashtag SAFM Meeting Point. It's 8 minutes past 8.
We have different languages and cultures, but what we have in common is that we all want a dignified funeral and for our loved ones not to worry about money when the time comes. Trust Clientele to provide you with affordable funeral cover that will pay out within 24 hours. SMS SAFM to 48031. That's SAFM to 48031. SMS now. Clientele Life is a licensed life insurer and an authorized FSP. Standard rates, terms and conditions apply.
Hi everyone, my name is Itumeleng Kune, SABC Sport football analyst. When I feel down and I listen to gospel, it gives me motivation. I'm a person who loves all genres. If I was a chef, my favorite meal that I would prepare would be pap, cabbage, meaty bones, with a bit of acha on the side. My favorite language is Portuguese. Bom dia, como está? Estou bem. What I like about SABC Sport is they give you the platform and the permission to be yourself and speak any language.
Catch the ever-passionate Itumeleng Kune's analysis of Ibola Leju on match days, live on Latuma. Proudly brought to you by SABC Sport.
For the love of the game.
Machabeng is building South Africa's next energy-led industrial future. Join us for the Machabeng Investment Summit, the 16th and 17th of October in Valcom, where opportunities meets innovation from gas and energy and green energy to logistics, agro-processing and advanced manufacturing. Discover how you can invest in a special economic zone backed by major energy projects, solar power and world-class infrastructure. Fast-track investment, power your growth, part of the future. Register now at mmep.machabeng.co.za. Powered by energy, driven by vision.
The Meeting Point, Monday to Thursday, 8 to 10 p.m. Only on SAFM. Koketso Sachane on SAFM.
At 10 minutes past 8, if you've just joined us, it is The Meeting Point, and this is the start of a 2-hour, what will be a 2-hour roundtable discussion, zoning in on the crisis on the Cape Flats, specifically, of course, looking at the issue of crime and gangsterism. As mentioned, we are going to be doing this in 3 sections between now and 9:30, and I want to before welcoming our guests, where we will be exploring what the reality is on the ground, to remind ourselves of what are normally news reports that pass that we forget, and there's a need to go back and find out what has been. To paint a picture on the lived experience of some Cape Flats residents, here's a report from SABC News.
From Overcome Heights near Muizenberg say they are living in constant fear. They say gangsters in their area are terrorizing them. The group says they need more police resources in their area to reduce the violence and improve safety in the community.
Our people is traumatized in Overcome Heights. Our kids can't even go to school. They can't even write tests. The situation is so bad. The kids have to sleep on the ground. They're not sleeping on the beds. We can't walk like people in Overcome Heights. Like, we can't walk. We must be scared to walk there.
The group says the high levels of crime in Overcome Heights is making it difficult for them to earn a living and to survive.
Every day they're walking with guns, and I can't go work. Every day I cannot go work.
We can work in the community for our children. I must stop my work this morning, and I run. And I could tell my son, my colleagues, you think it's right? We must stay like that. Our children can go nowhere.
Police Minister Feroz Kachalia recently visited the Western Cape to assess crime levels and evaluate policing capacity in the province. He says he's committed to exploring every possible avenue for improved collaboration and integration across all levels of government to tackle crime-fighting challenges across the Cape Flats, including in Overcome Heights.
That report from SABC News painting a brief picture on the reality of the lived experiences of residents on the Cape Flats. To dig deeper onto this, my guest this evening, Marguerite Holzhausen, is the Executive Director of the Trauma Center for Survivors of Violence and Torture, located in Cape Town. Bradley Johannesson is community activist, and also there is Siabulela Monakali, who is a communications manager and head of education and outreach at Ilita Labantu. Thank you very much to all three of you for being here and for allowing or saying yes to our invitation. I was saying to Marguerite, Bradley, and Sia earlier that as a country we are immersed in all things. At the moment, what's happening in the ad hoc committee with General Ntantla Mkhwanazi. There's also, of course, what has been with the ongoing Madlanga Commission of Inquiry that speaks to the broad issues of what's happening and that supposed link between the criminal underworld, the police, members of the executive, members in the legislature. And as South Africans, we get caught up in these moments. But while this is happening, there is a consistent story and reality of what is happening on the Cape Flats. And in many ways, we tend to get immune to it. And so this whole roundtable discussion really, as discussed with the team, is let's bring this back to the forefront so that we can dig deep into what is going on. I want to start with you, Bradley. This is about really painting a picture of what is happening. For those who do not know, the reminder of what has been, as we sit today, what is the lived experience, particularly of children on the Cape Flats?
Well, there's what, 490 killings happening in the last 6 months. There's what, 83 in the last month. Our kids are taught how to dodge bullets before finishing school. It is a sick thing that's happening in our communities, and I speak out of my own experience where you get phone calls during the night where you need to go and fetch a kid out of a gang-violent area because there's a threat on that child's life, and this 1% of a community is holding a community hostage. And it's so big that government is involved in it, and I will say it out loudly and proudly that government is involved in it, because it hasn't just happened yesterday. It's been around before apartheid's been around. It's been around for forever and a day, and communities lost their faith in policing and in government.
I'm going to ask you to hold your mic closer to you when we do come back to you. But Marguerite, again on the same front, and I know we've got some challenges with audio, so I'm sure we can fix that as well. But coming to you in staying with that particular theme of what is that reality, and I deliberately, and I'm so glad Bradley also referred to kids who unfortunately have to learn how to duck bullets as part and parcel of just going to school or even just living in certain communities. And I deliberately went to that SABC report because the words of that mother that says, our kids sleep on the ground, they can't sleep on the bed. I'm reminded of a story many years ago of a child who was sitting in the lounge in their home and how a stray bullet went through the window and killed that child. It's supposed to be a home, it's supposed to be a place of safety, but even that is not a reality. In the work that you do, what has been the overall lived experience, messages coming from those whom you interact with?
So, thank you for the opportunity also to share what we encounter in our work. We have social workers working in the Cape Flats on a daily basis with children in schools. We often sit at the back of police stations in the victim-friendly rooms. In some of the communities we work in Delft, Kraaifontein, Manenberg, Bonteheuwel, Belhar. Some of the communities in the Cape Flats, and there's other organizations working in other areas. But what we found, for example, in schools is that mental health amongst children is really a concern for us. Right. Often when we have a group of 20 children, 10 would indicate that they have considered harming themselves and having suicidal thoughts. And if you look in the system where children are in, there are not a lot of people offering mental health support to children. Now I'm just talking about, yes, we have the problem, and what do we do now with the problem? How do we support children who are experiencing all these things, who are traumatized? How can a child learn when they like we were talking about now, dodging bullets. How can you learn if you are having to fight for your life all the time? We know scientifically that what happens to the brain is you go into a fight and flight response or freeze response. And that, in opposed to that, that means that your brain is getting into survival mode. So your thinking brain is switched off in order for you to respond, not to think too much, but to respond to whatever threat may come your way. So that's what happens to people in a war environment, which is literally, we have a war happening out there in our communities. If you look at the amount of killings, it's comparable to the amount of deaths that people experience daily, monthly in places like Ukraine. So we have a war situation. And how can children learn if they are constantly in this fight and flight response, in this mode? Then we don't understand why we are surprised when children don't do well in school. When what are all these standardized tests if it doesn't show up well, and then there's only one social worker in schools for every 20 schools. So there's a lot of resources lacking for supporting children with their mental health. And then now another part of the topic will be prevention.
Yeah. Those are the areas that I really want us to also touch on in painting that reality of considering how severe things are. What is the assistance that is being given? Because yes, we know that there are a number of organizations that are doing amazing work on the Cape Flats. Yeah. But over and above those organizations, what is the state doing? What are the resources that have been given to ensure that children are able to, and I focus on children specifically, not only as a father, but as a society, if the environment is a danger to kids, and if we are not providing any resources to not only stop that, to cut a particular, cycle, to bring preventative measures, then we're sitting with quite a problem. It is a meeting point on SAFM. My guest, Marguerite Holshausen, the Executive Director of the Trauma Center for Survivors of Violence and Torture, Bradley Johannesson, community activist, and we will also hear from Sia Monakale, Communications Manager and Head of Education and Outreach at Ilita Labantu. It's a meeting point on SAFM, 21 minutes past 8.
They will not get on a flight to the United States, Mexico, and Canada, but they are still hungry for victory, while Bafana want to return to the summit of Group C. This is the 2026 FIFA World Cup African qualifier. Be part of the action. Zimbabwe versus South Africa on Friday, 10 October at 5:30 p.m. Live on SABC2 and SABC Plus. Then on SABC radio stations at 6 p.m. Proudly brought to you by SABC Sport.
For the love of the game.
This October month, SFM joins the world in breast cancer awareness. We bring you conversations that highlight the importance of early detection, survivor stories that inspire hope, and expert advice that could save lives. Together, let's spread awareness and support the fight against breast cancer. SAFM, leading the conversations that move us. The Meeting Point, Monday to Thursday, 8 to 10 p.m.
To 107 nationwide at 22 minutes past 8. We are well into our 2-hour round table discussion focusing on a Cape Flats that is in crisis, and the guests that I have with me as we continue to paint the picture on the realities on the ground. Marguerite Holshausen, the Executive Director of the Trauma Center for Survivors of Violence and Torture, Bradley Johannesson, Community Activist, and also Sia Monakale, Communications Manager and Head of Education and Outreach at Ilita Labantu. Again, thank you to all three of you. Sia, there's a particular picture that has been painted thus far by Bradley and Marguerite on the reality on the ground. There's the work that you do as Ilita Labantu. If you were to paint a picture, what does it look like?
Thank you. I think the picture that I would paint is that we are a country that is in crisis. And the crisis that we face within the Cape Flats is a crisis that has been there for a long time. And the sad reality is that once you don't actively seek to address this crisis, you will see a proliferation of so many issues. And at the end of the day, when it comes to crime and violence, children suffer the most. And we see that a lot when it comes to, the type of interventions that we do as Ilitha Bantu through our learner-centered outreach program, where we have school visitations programs within the schools, where we see a lot of kids who suffer a lot of trauma due to the amount of violence that they face at home and the amount of violence that they face within the community. And the sad part about it is that, you've come to see, also the proliferation of violence that takes place within the schools. And with that being said, schools are a microcosm of the society that we see. And a lot of the things that we see within a particular community, whether if, for instance, there's a particular criminal dynamic that takes place within a community, say, for instance, there's a lot of sexual violence that takes place within a community, you would see that being exhibited a lot in the behavior of the children of that school.
Let's stay there with it, because it almost as if, again, staying with children, that children on the Cape Flats, there are multiple threats, right? The threat in the home, them experiencing and witnessing gender-based violence, a home that's supposed to be safe, and then outside, the threat of being killed, being recruited into gangs, also experiencing gender-based violence, purely by going to visit a friend, by going to the shop, by going to school. And then it brings me back to what Marguerite was touching on around the resources that exist or not, because we're talking about, and you said it, we are a traumatized people. We're talking about a traumatized people, a traumatized country, a traumatized community, traumatized families, traumatized children. So what is the support that is there?
The sad part with regards to the question that you're asking, there is inadequate support that comes from the state itself. And when we were speaking earlier on with my colleagues, and we were trying to diagnose some of these problems, is that, the NGO sector, civil society activists, we sit at the English is leaving me. We sit in the middle, precipice.
I also struggle with that word.
I was looking for that word. Take that mic, right? Okay. We sit in the middle between the community and government. And often where government fails, us in the middle, civil society, NGOs, those service providers have to play such a tremendous role. Firstly, not only just to help and remedy the situation when it comes to try and remedy the situation with children who are suffering trauma through violence, but also to hold government accountable for the lack of services or lack of delivery of those services within the communities where children are suffering most. And the sad part about it, when I think Marguerite was talking about it, is that the sad part is that when it comes to the social workers that are placed at these schools or allocated to these schools, when it comes to children that have experienced some form of an issue, it takes close to a month for them to even address that issue or come to that issue. That's why with us at Ilitha Bantu, we have placed our social workers within the schools where we find that these problems, because government are so ineffective in responding to many of the issues that are affecting our children. And many of these problems, you'll find that children are exhibiting behavioral problems that stem from things that are taking place at home. Where children, you'd find that teachers now have to identify those key issues, that a child is not passing at school, a child looks like they were not properly dressed or adequately dressed to come to school, that those telltale signs, and children obviously won't necessarily tell anyone about these issues, but it's exhibited in their behavior. And the sad part is that government, in their response to trying to remedy the situation, they are too slow.
We've got some technical challenges which force me to move around a little bit, which is fine. And I see some of our other guests have arrived, Dr. Shahida. Bradley, I want to come to you because in staying with this reality of the state and whether the state is providing assistance or not, there's also what we cannot ignore, the socio-economic conditions, the historical factors as to how we got here in the first place, before we speak about whether the state is there or any other organization, because the existence of an organization is on the back of a condition on the ground, but that condition in itself has got an origin. If we can speak to that as to why is it that we've got this reality on the Cape Flats, historically what has been, and what are the different socio-economic conditions leading to this reality?
So the simple answer to your question is poverty. Poverty on the Cape Flats is huge because most of our communities don't have. The families in communities don't have. And that has become the stepping stone for our crime syndicates to use that to empower a family that doesn't have by exploiting, extorting them. And it's become the norm. It's become reality. We spoke about, we hear killings and all that. It's become norm because we've just gone into survival. And our families, our children have gone into survival. So be it that they don't want to go home. They want to stay at school rather and not go home. I spoke to a young boy where he said he doesn't want to go home because he doesn't want to be there because of the violence surrounding that house. And that is shocking, that due to poverty, they still have to deal with the other issues, the other social ills around them, the drugs, the gangs, the whatever the case may be. It's enough you're hungry. Now you need to fear for your life because you're not safe going to the shop for a packet of chips.
It's a tragic one, and we'll continue the conversation as we paint the picture of what is, but also the need to, and I wouldn't want to dwell on it, because I think sometimes as a country, we dwell on policing versus where did the issue actually start? What is the root of this crisis? And if we're going to focus purely on policing and not discussing the roots of the socioeconomic challenges and what Bradley spoke about around poverty, then it's a losing battle. And I look forward to the conversation we'll be having also with Dr. Shahida Jansen, who's got some incredible insights, and also the work that she's done in speaking to and interacting with young men. Because also at the core of this crisis is young men. It's a meeting point on SAFM. We've got a roundtable discussion focusing on the crisis on the Cape Flats. Be part of the conversation. 086-000-2032. We'll take a break and continue. It's 28 minutes to 9.
Advice from FNB Private. Because the perfect overseas trip starts with planning. Save and spend in multiple currencies with your FNB Global account and lock in exchange rates. Enjoy up to 40% off flights with eBucks Travel and order Forex on the FNB app delivered to you at no extra cost. Your adventure awaits. Unlock invaluable with FNB Private. Help changes everything. FNB, a division of First Rand Bank Limited, an authorized FSP and credit provider. TC's own rules and limits apply.
Youth football is on a real vibration in Chile. 24 under-20 national teams are fighting for the ultimate glory. Rally behind African champions, Amachita, including 3 continental representatives, Egypt, Morocco, and Nigeria. This is the 2025 FIFA Under-20 World Cup. Catch the action live on SABC 1, SABC Plus, SABC Sport on DTT Channel 4, and SABC radio stations from 27 September to 20 October 2025. Proudly brought to you by SABC Sport.
For the love of the game.
Gender-based violence is destroying lives and tearing communities apart. It happens in homes, in schools, at workplaces, and too often in silence. But it doesn't have to continue. If you see it, Speak out. If you are hurting, reach out. Because doing nothing is not an option. Listen to all 19 SABC radio stations for hard talk, discussions, advice, dramas, educational shows, and interviews around GBV with experts, survivors, lawmakers, and a whole country affected by gender-based violence. All on your favorite SABC radio station. Call 0800 428 428 to report abuse or get help. GBV, it ends with you. This message is brought to you by the SABC. The Meeting Point, Monday to Thursday, 8 to 10 p.m. Only on SAFM.
104.2, 107 nationwide. We continue with our roundtable discussion focusing on the crisis on the Cape Flats, and we have a new guest whom I will introduce. But before we do so, I would also like us to just go back to, again, the reality on the ground and the question of policing. The question of community policing forums also remains a large discussion point as to how we address the challenges on the Cape Flats. And this report is from SABC News, speaking to policing of gang violence on the Cape Flats.
Witnessed in areas like Mfuleni, Kailicha, Hanover Park and Mitchell's Plain. In Ponty-Yevele, a 3-month-old baby was recently hit by a bullet when home intruders shot at a woman. Community police forums in the areas are mobilizing.
We all know that the areas that are contributing to most of the violence on the Cape Flats are in the metro, consisting of 13 stations, and we feel that a clear plan with resources must be implemented in that area. We know that SAPS has informed us they have now requested additional resources from national in terms of deployment, and that they do have Operation Lockdown in those areas. In addition to that, also we would like to see that crime intelligence is being intensified and that proactive measures must be taken to prevent these shootings from happening in the first instance.
CPFs are also working on safety programs in hotspots areas which will be forwarded to the police. Community-based organizations say plans must include educating communities.
We will need much more, given the state of the fact that communities don't trust police, the fact that communities have been neglected by the state, and this criminal economy has, provided for them. So that is why even when an organization like PAGAT is raising its head, communities won't just, join the march against gangsterism and that, because those guys have their hands and their feet in the communities. They are putting bread on the table, and in the end, that existential question, as I always say, is what's important.
That report from SABC News, speaking to policing on the Cape Flats. And joining us now on the line, retired Major General Jeremy Vieri. Thank you very much, Major General Vieri, for giving us of your time this evening.
Listeners.
And also joining us on the panel discussion in studio, Dr. Shahida Jansen. Her research interests including male-focused psychotherapy with boys and men and models of human nature. She has facilitated men's groups for over a decade and a half, and it was at the end of 2022 where I remember I was a part of it, where UNISA published her first book, Masculinity Meets Humanity, an adapted model of masculinized psychotherapy. And we'll hear from Dr. Jansen in a bit. But if we could maybe come to you, Jeremy Vieri, as a country, we are watching all that is unfolding around different commissions, Madlanga Commission and others. and there is this continued criticism or even the trust deficit that was also referred to in the SABC News report of between the public and the police, which might or does have an impact on how policing is handled. What has been your experience, particularly in policing on the Cape Flats, whether it is the question of the trust deficit, if it does exist, or how differently policing can be done on the Cape Flats?
Okay, if one looks at what is being discussed in the parliamentary committee at the moment, I think you ought to have a clear understanding that corruption has penetrated almost all levels of the South African police. Now, that is not new. It has always been like that as far as I'm concerned, in my experience. And it is one of the reasons why, for example, the gangs that we're sitting with here are 80, 90, and some up to 200 years old. Now, it is only after the Prevention of Organized Crime Act, in relation to gang provisions of that act, that this problem was ever recognized firstly as a policing problem that requires dedicated kind of investigation and dedicated intelligence focus, and to look at the business side of these gangs, because it is the business side of the gangs that kept them existing for so long. And that was never tackled because that capability didn't exist before. So they're fairly entrenched. That's the first thing we should accept. Inside policing, when we do address it, some of the investigations I've been of, like the guns to gangs where we arrested Prinsloo, you must understand, even if the public out there thinks we have a lot of numbers, they mean absolutely nothing when you fight gangs or when you fight organized crime, because you must select who you make part of your team very carefully. You must screen them regularly, and you must basically, for the duration of a long-term investigation, to take down a gang like we did under this legislation on a few occasions, or even in the firearm investigation. It demands utmost secrecy even from your senior managers, because they tend to talk too much. Whether they talk to politicians to boast about it or whatever, but they do compromise your investigations through loose talk or through trying to posture, defensively when people say they're doing nothing. So you work this system and you work these investigations, and it takes you a long time to with dedicated prosecutors through a project methodology, and you keep things secret for as long as possible until there's no possibility of compromise. And that sometimes takes years. So that is one of the challenges, I would say. The other thing is, if one talks about the community here, one thing I found some positive examples of in areas I've worked in is where the community is organized enough to act as a counterforce and to reclaim streets from gangs. And streets and turfs for gangs are just areas, they are markets, okay? But where community is able to reclaim that space with the support through their mobilization and being publicly supported by the police in that mobilization, for want of a better word, as the community's armed wing. There are examples where we are able to shift the space back. Because gangs must be able to manifest themselves on the street in the form of violence, in the form of their activity, in order to show their existence or sustain their existence. Our job with the community is a unified community, is to counter-mobilize, defend our community mobilization in the area, build structures that territorially deal with the criminal governance of gangs. And that is what it is. Criminal governance, and we need to reassert our control.
I want to pause there for a second. Major General Jeremy Vieri, really appreciate it. And I know we've got a few more minutes with you, but I want to bring in Dr. Shahida Jansen. The point that Jeremy Vieri makes of the counter-mobilization, the power of the community, for it to succeed, it also requires a certain level of agency on the part of the community. And if I were to zone in your work, because it is these young men that are being targeted. So on the one hand is the reality of these young men, but also what work is being done to ensure that they themselves feel that agency and they form part and parcel of that counter-mobilization that Jeremy Vieri speaks to. I'm gonna bring this mic to you.
You know, I want to enter the conversation perhaps in this way. When you look at gangsterism and you look across the world, you can certainly see that it's a global, a universal phenomenon. You can go to the whole of Latin America, you can go to North America, to Canada, to Italy. You will find that there are gang formations, right? So I think that's the first point that I want to make. Then I think it's perhaps been indirectly referred to. When you look in post-colonial context, you particularly see male-driven violence following post-colonial violence. And so if we come to South Africa, for instance, the fact that we have a lot of male-driven violence, for me, is very much by design, because part of your colonial onslaught, because now we're talking about foundational violence, right? We're talking about the kind of violence that 3 centuries later, because you destabilize the very foundations of the society. 3 or 4 centuries later, you still have the effects. So what we have not done is to perhaps begin the conversation where it really started. And so part of your colonial onslaught is to target and to attack your masculine resources. And so the fact that we are sitting with a country with the highest rates of absent fathers is very much by design. It's not an accident, right? And so I think when we speak about male violence, we need to first speak to the root of male violence. And when you have father absence to the extent and the degree that we have, that in itself is violence, all right? So that's the first thing. And then in terms of the foundational violence that gets put in place by the colonial onslaught, is that it separates people from the means of production. The whole society, the colonized, there's a disturbance in the access to the means of production. And then you also then have a disturbance in terms of the humanity. And so if we then want to get to the real root of the problem, we need to go to the beginning. I'm going to... I want to pause there and bring back Jeremy Vieri, and I know Marguerite's still with us. I'll get to you. Jeremy Vieri, the point that Dr. Shahida Jansen makes, and the very clear, undeniable reality, how much of that, if at all, comes into the thinking and the strategy on a policing level? The men and women in blue on the ground, do they have that rooting in understanding the origin of the problem and how to then not only police, but also address what's happening in these communities that they are policing?
Okay. I think firstly, let's just get it as the minister indicated in Mitchell's Plain, there is no gang strategy. So that's the first thing. But what there is, and that reflects the challenge, is what we call fire brigade policing. Whenever there's something, we bring in a lot of resources and that we can't sustain in the long run, and just to stabilize the situation, and then we go and then the problem just recurs because we do not address the root causes which we are talking about. But Speaking to what was said by Shahida, I, in 2021, represented the police at an Interpol conference in San Salvador on gangs. From all over the world, gang investigators like myself came together and we spoke about what we have. And there was one very interesting thing that came up. We wanted to understand what creates this propensity for this male violence. Where does it come from? And while I was sharing my ideas with my colleagues, we both had a common thing. One colleague from Sao Paulo, for example, mentioned something that resonated with the study we did in Earthwork Walk in Hanover Park when I was looking at this question. And that compared to any other area in Hanover Park, okay, Earthwork had the highest incidence of domestic violence. Now that was one thing. Gang-infested, Americans gang-based, high incidence of violence. I tried that in Tafelsig again, and I found the same pattern. From my experience in the Elsies River, in particular from an area called Lousebos, I found a similar pattern in relation to gang violence. Now, I asked myself, what is it? Because this colleague from El Salvador was telling me the same thing, and another one from Brazil, in Sao Paulo. And what we discovered, that propensity that makes kids ready for gangs comes from the violence they are exposed to in their domestic environment. That is what was the correlation. Because by the time they're 10 and 12 years old, the only way they know how to resolve the issue is violently. That is the point. The other point that we picked up, which was a similar thing to El Salvador, was where traditional culture has eroded to the point that young men no more have that alternative sense of belonging that takes them into adulthood, where there are no facilities of sports where young men can come together differently and belong differently in a positive way. The other place where they'll find that peer comfort and identity is a gang, because it is the only alternative form of belonging that existed in some areas. The traditional youth structures were gone. The other export structures, activities have declined. If you look at our schools on the Cape Flats, you know how there's now an inner fence and an outer fence at the schools. At most of our schools, the inner fence is only around the building and the sports facilities in abandoned. So we're talking about those are two important points to
different languages and cultures, but what we have in common is that we all want a dignified funeral and for our loved ones not to worry about money when the time comes. Trust Clientele to provide you with affordable funeral cover that will pay out within 24 hours. SMS SAFM to 48031. That's SAFM to 48031. SMS now. Clientele Life is a licensed life insurer and an authorized FSP. Standard rates, terms and conditions apply.
This week on FC Meets, Tisetso and Bandile sit down with TS Galaxy and Bafana Bafana midfield maestro Puso Ditejani. He shares his story of turning adversity into opportunity and obstacles into triumph. Tune into SABC Sport on DTT Channel 4 and SABC Plus this Saturday, 11 October at 6 p.m. FC Meets, football made for community by community. Retenta game. Proudly brought to you by SABC Sport.
For the love of the game.
This October month, SFM joins the world in breast cancer awareness. We bring you conversations that highlight the importance of early detection, survivor stories that inspire hope, and expert advice that could save lives. Together, let's spread awareness and support the fight against breast cancer. SAFM, leading the conversations that move us.
Koketso Sachane on SAFM.
7 minutes to 9. A few minutes before we get to the news at 9 with Greg Host, as we conclude the first hour of our roundtable discussion focusing on the crisis on the Cape Flats. Jeremy Vieri, I apologize for cutting your word. I think capitalism came in the way to the need for us to address these matters, but if I could allow you a few minutes to conclude what you're speaking to.
Basic violence in terms of exposure to our children to violent ways of solving problems, and you'll find a correlation in particular gang hotspots with a high incidence of a 1. I'm not saying it's like a convergence. I'm not saying it's a causative thing, but the propensity, if you look at some of these perpetrators over a period of 20 years, generationally, or 20 or 30 years, it's interesting that they are highly concentrated in these gang hotspot areas. The other thing is, of course, the absence of presenting people positive alternative, young men, positive alternative means of belonging. I grew up in Elsies River and I grew up in Tiervlei. I was forced to play rugby for Tigers, and I'm glad I was forced to do it. Because apart from Tigers Rugby Club and the soccer club in Elsies River and the school sports team where I played rugby, I learned a different sense of belonging that I could use as an example in my conduct and see examples in other people's conduct that is different from the guy in the gang who is hanging around at the Shabin. I could see that physically.
Yeah.
I found those peer experiences because I was forced into. Unfortunately, our children don't have much of that today.
Jeremy Vieri, we really appreciate you giving us of your time this evening. Thank you very much, retired Major General Jeremy Vieri there, speaking to us not only on policing matters, but on deeper issues of, as Rashida earlier on shared, the origin of this crisis, the state of the young man. Still with us in studio, Marguerite Holzhausen, the Executive Director of the Trauma Center for Survivors of Violence and Torture, Sia Monakali, sitting quietly, patiently, Communications Manager for Ilita Labantu. And I want to come to you, Marguerite, but before we do so, also a reminder on the other side of 9, we'll hear more from Dr. Jansen. We'll also have with us Albie Isaacs, Chairperson of the Cape Flats Safety Forum. I want to go back to what Jeremy Vieri mentioned, what Shahida also mentioned. We cannot separate what is, or exclude, what is happening in the home to how it forms this young man, this young woman who goes into the community, meeting other young men, young women, who are also of the same nurturing, negatively that is. And it goes back to the question of poverty. It goes back to the effects of colonialism and apartheid and how it's destroyed communities and how it manifests and how the ground is fertile for such.
And that's exactly what you're taking the words out of my mouth, that
we
actually, there is fertile ground for crime and violence to thrive. The fertile ground is the lack of resources, the poverty, the historical trauma, intergenerational trauma that has been transferred from generation to generation, which we haven't addressed yet. There's still unfinished business of the TRC. And often we try to find simple solutions for complex problems. We are not working with something you can't go in with a police operation. Now you're going to root out gangsterism. And what often people like, we're going to have a march. We're going to march against gangsterism. It's never stopped gangsterism. But we have to look at ways of addressing the unique dynamics of each community. And we're talking about the home. We know that violent perpetration, one of the direct determinants of that is childhood trauma. So we need to also, we can't just say, okay, let's give support. We also need to find ways of dealing with with the root cause, the trauma that the child already experienced. Maybe they are in school 10, 11 years old, they already experience a lot of trauma, we have to deal with that. But we also have to find alternative spaces for this child to get different influences, to heal, to build their skills, to become economic, ready for the economic activity one day in their life, to have opportunities to learn, to grow, to study, to thrive. And we need to create these spaces in communities. And my question is, do we have those spaces, and do we have a conducive environment for people to grow, to develop? That would be that counter space against what is happening in communities against the criminal activities and the criminal thriving at the moment. The moment the criminal element is thriving in communities, but what is the alternative? What is the counter spaces we create?
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because you set the tone very well, Marguerite, in what we will discuss in the next hour. The spaces that exist, but also I would want to dig deeper into the areas that Dr. Shahida has also touched on, and I will hear from Sia as well. I'll bring into the conversation after the break Chairperson Isaacs, and we'll also make sure that we bring back Bradley Johannesson as well in the discussion as we go into what exists, what more still needs to be done, and also just allowing all of us to collectively discuss what we would have covered at least since 8 o'clock, but charting a way forward as to what more needs to be done. Under what circumstances do we do what needs to be done? It is a meeting point on SAFM. That was at least the first hour of the roundtable discussion. Thank you to our guests. We'll continue with them, and also we'll make space for your inputs as well. It's 9 o'clock. Greg Host has got the latest news.
Thank you, Koketso. Road accident funds financial statements in the spotlight, and 2 students injured in university clashes. Good evening. A parliamentary inquiry has heard that the Road Accident Fund deviated in its role as the social benefit entity when calculating its financial statements for the past 3 financial years. Instead, the entity acted similar to a private insurance company. This is revealed by the CEO of the Accounting Standards Board, Janine Poggiolini, at the parliamentary inquiry to the financial affairs of the Road Accident Fund being conducted by the Standing Committee on Public Accounts.
We have a look at this group of entities is that it's something like an insurance contract. So what this would typically mean is that if you think about your own personal insurance, let's say you want to insure yourself against ill health, I would take out medical insurance, or I would go to a medical aid and say, this is the risk that I have. Could you please insure X, Y, and Z? And they would say, yes, indeed I would. And this is the contribution that you need to pay. So this idea of transfer of risk for compensation. So that's something like an insurance-like contract. So the determination that needs to be made for this whole group of entities really is whether or not they are social benefits, whether or not they are insurance-like activities.
2 students on the University of Fort Hare in the Eastern Cape have been taken to hospital after being injured in clashes with police during which buildings were set on fire. The students alleged they suffered gunshot wounds. The incident occurred on the Alice campus, where students have been demonstrating since Monday, demanding SRC elections and the resignation of the university's vice-chancellor. Police intervened after students clashed with a security company contracted by the university. The students then allegedly set alight the administration and student affairs buildings. Student leader Ususipe Fusani.
There's chaos that has erupted on campus. Students were fighting with Falcon, and allegedly, but confirmed, police officers from outside SAPS, they shot students using real bullets here in Alice campus. The other students is shot on the left knee. The other student is shot just above the heart, near the shoulder.
Meanwhile, the university says it has put extra measures in place. In a statement, it says it's met with the Provincial Community Safety MEC and the Acting Provincial Police Commissioner. The university says it has identified those behind the criminal elements which have resulted in the destruction of property. Academic activities remain suspended and police are monitoring the situation. The KwaZulu-Natal Police Commissioner, Nchacha Mkhwanazi, says he believes Police Minister Senzo Mchunu, who's on special leave, had an unethical relationship with controversial businessman Brown Mokgotsi. He was testifying for the second day before Parliament's ad hoc committee, probing allegations of criminal infiltration and political interference in the criminal justice system made by Mkhwanazi. He told Parliament's Police Portfolio Committee in March that Mokgotsi, who's an associate of Mchunu, he repeated to MPs of the ad hoc committee that he thinks the relationship between the two men is untoward.
For starters, the minister claimed, when I appeared before the Portfolio Committee on the 5th of March 2025, he claimed that he did not know the fellow I was talking about. It's been proven by the very same minister who says, no, that person is a comrade. Minister Mchunu claiming that this man is a comrade, the political party concerned says he's not a comrade. That means the conclusion we must draw is that this is not a comrade, he's a criminal. That the minister is invited to be part of the police. Minister lied when he said he's a comrade.
Amnesty International is calling on Tanzania's government to immediately disclose the whereabouts of a former diplomat turned government critic. The BBC's Sasha Schlichter has more.
His brother says Humphrey Pule was abducted by a police officer from his home in Dar es Salaam on Monday. A video showed broken doors and a blood-stained floor. Speaking to the BBC, his mother appealed to the police to bring back her child, dead or alive. Amnesty said those responsible must be held accountable. Mr. Pule had served as Tanzania's ambassador to Cuba since 2013, but resigned in July, accusing the government of human rights abuses.
Top story, a parliamentary inquiry is heard that the Road Accident Fund deviated in its role as a social benefit entity when it calculated its financial statements for the past 3 financial years. That's SAFM News, I'm Greg Coase.
The Meeting Point, Monday to Thursday, 8 to 10 p.m. Only on SAFM.
Our people is traumatized in Overcome Heights. Our kids can't even go to school. They can't even write tests. The situation is so bad. The kids have to sleep on the ground. They're not sleeping on the beds. We can't walk like people in Overcome Heights. Like, we can't walk. We must be scared to walk there.
Every day they're walking with guns, and I can't go work. Every day I cannot go work.
We can work in the community for our children. I must stop my work this morning and I run. And I could tell my son, my colleagues, you think it's right? We must stay like that. Our children can go nowhere. The kids have to sleep on the ground. They're not sleeping on the beds. Our kids can't even go to school. They can't even write tests.
Koketso Sachane on SAFM.
It is 6 minutes past 9. Hey, English. The data bundles run out sometimes here. They run out. If you've just joined us, it's the second hour of a roundtable discussion focusing on the crisis on the Cape Flats. In the previous hour, we had with us Marguerite Holzhausen, the Executive Director of the Trauma Center for Survivors of Violence and Torture, Bradley Johannesson, community activist. We also spoke to retired Major General Jeremy Vieri. And with us now still, Dr. Shahida Jansen. There's Sia Monakali, Communications Manager, Head of Education at Ilita Labantu, and we are joined. Welcome to Albie Isaacs, Chairperson of the Cape Flats Safety Forum. We meet our guests after the break. It's a meeting point on SAFM, 7 minutes past 9.
EFC is live this Thursday. The man of the people, Delete Wisstason,
if you're inside here and you give up, then you're not supposed to be inside here.
steps up to challenge the Zambian champion, Ken Sekeletu, for his interim EFC featherweight title.
This is the moment I've been waiting for. This is the moment I've been training for. And this is the moment why I came to South Africa.
EFC 128, live from the World Sports Betting Arena. Watch it on SABC Sport Channel on DTT Channel 4 from 7 p.m. Brought to you by SABC Sport.
SAFM's award-winning drama department presents to you the radio drama series, Skyline.
Press that to cockpit medical emergency now.
Cabin crew to your stations.
where the skies promise adventure, but behind the cabin doors, untold secrets are found.
He's signing off on cheap parts they installed like it's nothing.
Catch the radio drama series every Saturday at 9 p.m. on SAFM, leading the conversations that move us. Gender-based violence is destroying lives and tearing communities apart. It happens in homes, in schools, at workplaces, and too often in silence. But it doesn't have to continue. If you see it, speak out. If you are hurting, reach out. Because doing nothing is not an option. Listen to all 19 SABC radio stations for hard talk, discussions, advice, dramas, educational shows, and interviews around GBV with experts, survivors, lawmakers, and a whole country affected by gender-based violence. All on your favorite SABC radio station. Call 0800 428 428 to report abuse or get help. GBV, it ends with you. This message is brought to you by the SABC. The Meeting Point, Monday to Thursday, 8 to 10 p.m.
(104.2, 107 nationwide). We continue in our roundtable discussion. And before we get to our guests, what we are going to be doing in this section is drawing a bit more from the contributing factors to the picture that Dr. Shahida mentioned, but also in speaking to the way forward, in highlighting the safe spaces that exist, the work that is being done by community members, what the challenges are, and what still needs to be done. But before we do so, here's a report by SABC News on the work already being done by the organization Balls Not Guns.
It's after school on a Friday afternoon in Westbank, and here on the soccer pitch, children from all ages are gathered to spend an hour or two away from the dire reality of an unsafe community, riddled by gun violence, gangsterism, and drug abuse. They are part of the Balls Not Guns project, which aims to give youth alternative experiences, ball games, dance and mime programs, as well as photography and arts and culture initiatives among them.
Whether we will achieve it is a different question, but what is of utmost importance to us is to be able to constantly remind the kids that no matter who and what your personal situation is, there is always bigger, there is always better. And even if that bigger and better is just to get out of your own house for an hour or two, just to be able to go and spend time with young people who are of different mind than what you are. You might be the one to uplift another young person that day, or another young person might be the one to uplift you that day.
The young people themselves say they feel scared to even walk to school, not knowing when the next shot will ring out or whether they could get hurt or worse. It's not a life, they say, they want for themselves.
We that grow up in Westbank, the stuff you experience here is shooting every day, boys standing on the corners, on the shops, on the stoops, just smoking dacha and cigarettes and stuff. That's something for me I don't want to do in life.
What do you want to do in life?
In life, I want to be a photographer, I want to do tourism photographer, I want to travel the world.
We don't use guns, we don't run up and down in the streets and shoot people, young people's lives. So we destroy it. We still play with balls because we're kids and we want to show the people in the community we can do it. We want to make the other young kids, we want to love them up, and we want to make the community a better place and show that we can do it.
A mother who lost her 15-year-old son to gun violence after he witnessed the fatal shooting of his cousin says she wants every child to live to their full potential. While funding is hard to come by, they try their best to arrange activities for the children.
On this very moment,
West Bank is dark, and West Bank is a red zone. Gangsterism, shootings. Just last week, we buried 2 of our Muslim children that was shot. On the Cape Flats, the whole Cape Flats, I think it's about 270, with a 3-month-old baby included. It's a red zone, it's darkness, and we as both not guns, we want to come in where we can just tell our youth that there is light in the darkness.
The organization says despite the many challenges, they will keep the ball rolling in their plight to keep young people away from the dangers of gangsterism and gun violence.
Thank you very much to SABC News for that report. There is light in the darkness, to draw from those words, and in the next 45 minutes or so, hopefully we'll be able to speak more to the light that exists within the darkness, while also not running away from the darkness itself. Our guest in this section, Albie Isaacs, chairperson of the Cape Flats Safety Forum, Dr. Shahida Jansen, whose research interests include male-focused psychotherapy with boys and men. Also, it was about 3 years ago where I was fortunate to be invited to the launch of her book, Masculinity Meets Humanity, an adopted model of masculinized psychotherapy. And still with us, Siyabulela Manakali, Communications Manager at Elita Labantu. I want to bring Albie Isaacs into the conversation. Again, thank you very much for giving us of your time. We spoke earlier of, we've painted a picture of the reality on the Cape Flats, the challenges on the Cape Flats. And I want to say this before coming to you, that as we conclude this discussion, at least over the next few minutes, there is a very clear absence of the state. But what we do rely on is the work that, whether it's the work that Shahida has done, that Sia has done, but also we have these forums that exist on the Cape Flats, such as yours, Albie Isaacs. As chairperson of the Cape Flats Safety Forum, you have listened since 8 o'clock. And we're now at the question of the spaces that exist and the work that is being done by community members. What are you confronted with? What are the successes? Or to also, and to draw from what Jeremy Vieri was talking about, the mobilization that also exists in different communities on the Cape Flats and the successes of those as well.
Yeah, good evening to you and the viewers and the listeners out there. I think first and foremost, listening to the conversation since 8 o'clock, we need to acknowledge one, that what we've also been putting as the Cape Flats Safety Forum, we are currently experiencing urban terror at its worst in the Cape Flats Safety, on the Cape Flats. There's no other way to put it, no other word to put it. It's worse than what's currently happening in the war zones where there's actually war happening. To the extent, this show is on the backdrop. Just this morning, a 4-year-old child was shot in an overpark. You know, and those are the news that consistently, daily, communities have to fear. But I think what becomes important also is that from our side as the Cape Flats Safety Forum, and through our structures and through our engagements, yes, we believe there's the two theories or the two thoughts. From our side, we've been saying, let's look at bringing in the South African Defence Force now, as we move into the festive season, as a force multiplier to stabilize the area. We've picked up just over these since this weekend, almost 33 murders, just in the Cape Flats. So that becomes one. Secondly, from our side, we've persistently also been calling that we need to set up a probe to deal with gun violence, because the weapon that's being used is guns currently. So we need to set up a special probe. One want to reflect back in what Jeremy has said, retired Major General Vieri has said. And I think I had the opportunity in my days to work with him when he was the station commander at Mitchell's Plain. And one of the areas that he mentioned was the vibrancy of the communities that were there. There was this vibrancy of the community that needed to come out, and there was no name brand to it. whether your neighborhood watch, whether your street committee, whether your block committee, everybody came out on a specific day. And we specifically look at the crime threat analysis. Looking at the crime threat analysis, and it's not that your conventional Friday evenings, your conventional Saturday, because there's the mindset that crime only happens Fridays evenings and Saturday evenings. And I think if you look at the crime threat analysis these days, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 1 o'clock in the morning, when our kids need to go to school. And in that area, whilst I was that side of the world, we looked at the crime threat analysis and started mobilizing communities. And one can recall that one of the key factors or one of the key elements that one could draw from that era was the bonfires, you know. And we came from that school of thought to say, let's do with crime on a two-pronged approach, supply and demand. Supply, you deal with it as the agencies. Demand, we deal with it because it's our kids that goes to these alleged drug dealers and go and buy.
I want you to pause there because that is so important, because what you're raising there, Albie Isaacs, is the responsibility of the community as well. Because we have already spoken about how the root of the violence that we see manifesting through these kids happens in the home. But then there's also the responsibility of the home and in turn the community as well as being part of that two-tier approach to dealing with these challenges. It's 20 minutes past 9. We continue with our guests as a meeting point on SAFM.
Bafana clash with neighbors Zimbabwe in a FIFA 2026 World Cup qualifier at the Moses Mabhida Stadium on Friday the 10th of October 2025 at 6 p.m. Tickets are now available nationwide and online at all Ticket Pro outlets, including Spar, Postnet and all petrol stations. Fill up Mabhida to push Bafana to qualify. Bafana supporters, bring the noise at eThekwini and gates will open at 3 p.m. If you're not in Durban, wear your Bafana Friday gear and catch the game on SABC2. For more info, visit safa.net and at Bafana on all social media platforms.
The Meeting Point, Monday to Thursday, 8 to 10 p.m. Only on SAFM.
Twenty minutes past 9, we continue in our roundtable discussion. Our focus is on the crisis in the Cape Flats. Still with us, and patiently so, Siabulela Monakali, Communications Manager at Elita Labantu. Sia, we're talking about a way forward, but also taking stock of what is and the spaces that exist. Albie, you touched on the vibrancy in the community, which forms part and parcel of dealing with this reality. There is the work that you do at Ilifa Labantu, where not only dealing with the issue of gender-based violence, but you get to interact with, work with kids and people who come from these homes, who come from these communities as well. What is the challenges or the successes of creating these safe spaces?
No, thank you for that question. You know, while I was listening to all of the guests and what Doctor was actually saying earlier on, and one thing that I can pick up is that, you know, in South Africa, particularly with how government, I know we don't want to crush government too much, but in terms of how government tends to respond to issues related to violence, is that they always opt to have a reactionary approach to addressing violence and crime within our community. And a lot of emphasis is not necessarily placed on the proactive measures that ought to be placed in terms of dealing with crime. And when we're dealing with crime and violence within our communities, we cannot put a band-aid on a much deeper problem. And, you know, I like the fact that when we were listening to one of the inserts earlier on, and while when I was listening to that, I was actually putting on my communications hat when I deal specifically with the media, and I like challenging the media on these things, is that the sad part when we talk about all of these nuanced things that are taking place within our country, we often like to amplify the negative voices, and we never amplify the positive voices, because there's so many good things that are taking place within our communities. And I work a lot with the media. I love the work that I do with the media, but I often tell my media colleagues, guys, whenever I bring you to say we're going to have a book launch on we had our second book launch of women's stories. This is from pain to triumph. And these stories are trying to actually empower the younger generation of women that are coming up to say that these are, past activists. These are people who've been through a lot of pain, but through their stories, they've been able then to become victorious, through their struggles. And a lot of the time is that when we look in our media, through our newspapers, all we see is the negativity that is projected to us. And the sad part, that what that does to the psyche of communities is that we stay with that vision and that idea that we cannot overcome the challenges that we are faced with in society. So part of the challenge is in terms of what we want to do to change the situation that we are in, is to actually amplify the voices of the heroes and heroines that are taking that are taking these challenges within these communities and changing them into stories of victory. And a lot of these things are happening within our communities, but the sad part is that they are not being amplified on the bigger stage.
I want you to pass the mic to Dr. Shaida, because I want to stay with that, because it's such an important aspect. Because in the work that you've done, Dr. Shaida, the models of human nature, you've dealt with these young boys and men, and there is, while dealing with the challenges that they face, part and parcel of what exists with them is the modeling that they see, both negative and positive. What are the effects of that positive modeling, not only in the home, but also how a community is represented in the media, and the responsibility that we have? And I don't like talking about the media, because it's not a, it's not a monolith, right? But the modeling is also important, Dr. Shaida.
No, absolutely. But I think it goes back to, it is so important that we have better understandings of things. Because often I think perhaps that's where the problem lies. So perhaps part of why I then began to work with men, and then I had to write up the model in a book, is because of all the negativity that I thought actually had no scientific basis of what people were saying. So what I have been doing over the last, now almost 20 years, sitting beside men. In fact, I came from a men's group now to this place, is that men are able to, and they role model for each other, and they support each other, and they help each other to actually perform better. So to add to what both of you are saying, is that we need to create then more spaces. I think the General Vieri was also saying that, is that if we just create more spaces where you can find positive male bonding. In fact, I'd like to challenge, that my experience with men is that men actually bond very easily with each other. You put a group of strange men together from different class backgrounds, different cultures, different languages, and in no time they begin to bond with each other. So I think when it comes to what you were saying about the vibrancy, I think at all levels we need more vibrant communities. We need to go back and create more vibrant corpses of men, corpses of women, young men, young ladies, organize the community. And I think that forms, like he was saying, a very powerful bulwark against what we are facing.
I'm going to, in the last segment, invite back Bradley as well as Marguerite, but I'll be coming back to you. And yes, there is the Cape Flats Safety Forum, and part and parcel of that also is assisting with policing, but there's also, to speak to what Shahida was talking about, the environment that exists, the positive environment, the collective that is the forum. Who are these young men? Who are these men in that forum? And is there space, as part and parcel of the work that you do, to deal with the issue of the violence that emerges from them? And how has that unfolded in the work that you do in addressing the challenges in the respective communities?
I think it's important, what the colleagues are saying, is that we need to go back to basics. And when we say back to basics, I think the first insert was saying that most of the challenges happens at home and it's being brought to the street, if you get in the lack of the letter, of a better word. It becomes important that men itself, we don't have good role models, men in our society. Let me say, in the absence of that. Hence, people tend, or in particular our youth, tend to lean towards gangsterism or to lean towards that side. And I want to touch on the latter part of what my colleague are also saying, is that, yes, whilst we are here, we need to use this platform as well, the media platform, to start calculating the positives. Yes, whilst we need to read the negatives, the murders and those things, and as I've unpacked earlier on, 4-year-old child subsequently died today, we also need to portray the positives that's happening within the same society. We also need to portray and through the media needs to play that role, and not being negative towards any media house that needs to portray that positives that exist within society. And one can quickly go to one. I'm not a marketing person for the project, and again, it's a project that ourselves, when I was that side myself, Jeremy Veer and many other people have looked into, which is on the 18th, where we use, it's this inter-school drill competition. And through that drilling part, you started to instill discipline, although it's only a core group of the 2,000 learners, it's only maybe 20 or 30 that is part of that. So those are the things that the media need or broadcasting media generally needs to portray, that yes, whilst we have the gun shootings and all those things that are happening, there are still kids that went to go and practice to execute on the 18th, and I think it's the 18th of this month, at one of the stadiums, where they will go and display what they've been taught over and above, as I say, listening to the gunshots, listening mom and dad, or listening in the street, people using the 14th official language. And when I say the 14th official language...
what do you mean by that?
You know, the swearing part?
The?
Swearing part. Oh. When you know, the swearing part, I call that to 14th official language, where they get exposed to the 14th official language, yet that did not bother them to still go and practice. And I think those are the positives that we need to take out from communities and start showcasing that as well.
Albie Isaacs, the chairperson of the Cape Flats Safety Forum. Also still with us, Dr. Shahida Jansen, who published her first book, Masculinity Meets Humanity, an adapted model of masculinized psychotherapy. Siabulela Monakali of Elita Labantu still with us. We'll take a break and invite back Bradley Johannesson, community activist, as well as Marguerite Holzhausen, executive director at the Trauma Center for Survivors of Violence and Torture. It's a meeting point on SAFM 28 minutes to 10.
Gordon Ramsay is back, and your favorite kitchen disasters are still somehow in business. New season, same confused chefs, terrifying walk-ins, and enough grease to fry your Wi-Fi. Watch as Gordon tries to fix the unfixable with nothing but sheer rage, British sarcasm, and an iron stomach. Kitchen Nightmares Season 8, Wednesdays at 6 p.m. on S3. Come for the food, stay for the emotional damage. S3. Feel good.
Channel your inner feel-good on Expresso this October, from big global moments like the G20 summit to how it all plays out right here at home.
We are keeping it real this Mental Health Awareness Month with conversations that lift and inspire. And of course, all the good stuff that you love, delicious food, fashion trends, and everything in between.
Wake up with the Feel Good Breakfast Show, Expresso, weekdays 6 to 9 a.m. on S3.
The Morning Brief.
Can a scheme come and say that our rules prohibit practices such as slaughtering within the complex for cultural purposes?
Yes, certainly. We won't quality assure or rather approve those rules. The slaughtering of animals for cultural and religious purposes cannot be prohibited in terms of the Constitution and in terms of our rules now and practice directives. Conditions for slaughtering must be imposed and must be adhered to. For example, at least 2 weeks written notice must be given of the intended event. The date, which includes the date, the type of animal, the name and qualification of the person doing the slaughtering.
That's Mervyn Dorosami, Acting Adjudicator General at the Community Schemes Ombud Service.
Tulasizwe Simelane on The Morning Brief. The Meeting Point, Monday to Thursday, 8 to 10 p.m.
(104.2, 107 nationwide). Oh, I'm shocked at where we are. I'm shocked that everything has moved as quickly as it has. Bradley checking his time, wondering, where did the time go? We wrap up our panel discussion. Quite a lot has been said. And I want to express my appreciation to the guests who have stayed with us. Joining us back on the panel, Bradley Johannesson, community activist, also Marguerite Holzhausen of the Trauma Center for Survivors of Violence and Torture. Also still with us, Albie Isaacs, chairperson of the Cape Flight Safety Forum. There's also Siabulela Manakali, communications manager and head of education and outreach at Elita Labantu. And not forgetting also Dr. Shahida Jansen, who's done incredible work in male-focused psychotherapy, also published the book Masculinity Meets Humanity, an adapted model of masculinized psychotherapy. I would like to invite you also to join the conversation as we wrap up what has been a very insightful discussion. 086 000 2032. On the home stretch, Bradley, I deliberately shared the work that is done with Balls Not Guns because I know that that is part and parcel of the work that you have done. In going back to what is being done, what needs to be done, the power of community organizations and the work that you do, you know, with Gloria in Balls Not Guns, its impact, and also the assistance that is still needed, if you can speak to that.
Okay, on Balls Not Guns, I was explaining to Margarita how we started as feeding stations, and we saw the need for intervention with the kids there to get them off the street, and using the ball as the vehicle. Because give a ball to a child, you can have them entertained for hours. And it has grown from Westbank all the way to Lavender Hill. There's 9 communities where this is running in, and it is growing at a rapid rate, and we're needing more hands, more feet from communities. And then there's the support, the financial impact, making sure that Sissy has got gas to cook on, seeing that there's water for the kids to have. And there's a great need out there for financial support, but also mostly, I think for me, is the voluntary assistance of more hands and feet in our communities so that we can draw more kids and let us, I'm going to use this word very loosely, let us become the mop that is mopping up the blood of the streets by bringing our kids off the street into a safer space.
Is it working? And that's a very interesting analogy that you're using, but also it's not an analogy, it's a reality. Mopping up the blood, because that is reality. Is it working, Bradley?
In my space, yes.
Yeah.
Because that is my drive. It does get much at times where I don't find myself maybe in a good space because of the trauma that's happening. But yes, you know, I'm going to be that mop. I'm going to go and soak it up to bring our kids out of this.
Marguerite, in the trauma center that you run, and I mean, that stayed with me. Thank you, Bradley. Mopping up the blood. Albie was speaking of a 4-year-old that was killed just today. One can, the blood requires funding, a whole lot more trauma counselors. How is that journey, and what is still needed?
We need counseling, but we also need prevention. So we can't just, and I want to, we actually also use that mop analogy in a little bit of a different way. We always say at the trauma center, it actually came from my finance administrator, the idea. And sometimes the best ideas you get from people who are not social workers. And he said, like, the tap is running, but instead of us closing the tap, we are mopping. We are mopping, but so trauma counseling is like mopping. You know, there's so much trauma out there. We can mop until we are blue in the face, but we need to somewhere go and close the tap. You know, and that is the kind of work that Bradley is doing, taking the children off the streets. We have a beautiful project where we do educational theatre with youth. We take them in and we work with them 3 or 4 days a week, and we make a beautiful drama production, and we perform it for the community. We had full halls in Delft. We had like productions with thousands of people coming to listen to their kids performing, playing out what is happening in the community, and then having dialogues, having conversations where we can talk about these things happening. Those are the kind of things that I would say we need. And of course we need more trauma counseling, and we need more training for activists in the community to also be safe spaces, and to also to be able to contain trauma that they encounter around them.
I love you guys for the analogy that you're using. It allows for me to move on to the next person and tie in that analogy as a segue. But before we do that, let's just take a quick break. In the meantime, Shahida, I need you to think about that, the ever-flowing tap. But the ever-flowing tap that is the violent young men. And how the ever-flowing tap that is the violent young men. And what Marguerite was talking about in closing it, the work that it takes to close that tap, and how we do so. 19 minutes to 10.
This week on Off-Pitch Goals, former Orlando Pirates and Cape Town City attacking midfielder Mpoma Kola takes on the much sought-after coaching industry. He takes us through the strategy and patience required to thrive in this competitive industry. Tune in to SABC Sport on DTT Channel 4 and SABC Plus the Saturday 11 October at 8:30 p.m. Off-Pitch Goals, where we showcase how the stars score in business. Proudly brought to you by SABC Sport.
For the love of the game.
The Meeting Point, Monday to Thursday, 8 to 10 p.m. Only on SAFM.
(104 to 107) nationwide. We're wrapping up our panel discussion on the crisis on the Cape Flats. Just before the break, Marguerite used an analogy of you're mopping up, but the tap continues to flow. I want to tie that to your work, Dr. Shahida, because the flow is constantly having violent young men because of history, because of all that has happened. And there is the active work that is being done to try and close that tap. What more still needs to be done? What is being done to hopefully close that tap, or at least slow down the flow?
And I'm probably not going to be answering your question, right? But I'm going to step into, I'm a clinical psychologist by training, but I'm also a scholar. So for me...
Sorry, can I ask you to just grab that mic there? I'm not too sure what's happening. Yeah.
So when you speak, when you mention to me about taps and being able to screw taps, for me we have to think properly. We have to have conceptual clarity, right? Because the way you think about something will shape how you use your resources and whether you're actually effective. Because there's also a lot of doing that is happening, and the question that I have is, are we monitoring for efficacy? All right. So because that for me is the way I interpret about when you start talking about taps and open and close, right? Just to give you an example around the way we think about violence, for instance, we are not clear about how we define violence. When a little boy, when at home there's problems in the family, you will find that little boy, maybe when he goes to school, he becomes very disruptive and even aggressive in the school. But what he is doing, he is enacting the violence that he's unable to contain and unable to express of what it's doing to him. Now, the same with young, violent men. Young men enact the violences that we do not acknowledge that is happening in the community. For example, the violence of economic exclusion. You have all these men sitting on the side of the road, unable to find jobs, all right? We have almost 50% of young people not able to work. So I think we really need to step back and ask ourselves, that we're doing a lot of feel good. And of course, I don't want to be that person who's shooting down all this do-gooding, all right? But I think there's a lot of do-gooding, but we need to go back and ask ourselves, what are we doing and for who?
I'm so glad you took it there, because we touched on this, right? The origin of it, the socio-economic realities that we have, and the need to expand even more on it. And I'm glad that you sobering us back to that. And I want you to speak to this as well, because there is the work that continues, that must be done. But to go to Shahida's point, what is the work that you're doing and for who? Because if you're not dealing with this reality of an unacknowledged violence, poverty in itself is violent. Unemployment is violent. We do not see it because it's not physical, but it's violent to the spirit, it's violent to one's self-esteem, it's violent to how one sees oneself and sees those around oneself. So in speaking to that, Albie, the work that you do also in the communities, how do we bring that to light? How do we make sure that we address what Shahida is talking about in how we do our work?
I think it's important that as broad-based civil society movements, we need to come and take up our little space. And when I say our little space, yes, we do acknowledge that each individual organization or each individual institution have their own code of ethics or modus operandi. But I think it's important that we need to look at, yes, we have the challenges that's there, the writing is on the wall, but how do we begin to tap in and make that little difference? Yes, we might not be able to change the world, but to make that little difference, that is important. Even if you look at what my colleague is saying, what they are doing, that is the little difference that we need. We firmly believe, as the Cape Flat Safety Forum, a thorn can eat up an elephant. And once you start calculating that narrative, with your little, yes, we might not be big in terms of size as an organization, but just to go in and make that little change when it comes even to the extent when it comes to domestic violence. Make that little difference. Go out and address the issue. Go out and speak to the victim. You know, so those, in terms of answering your question, again, we started off to say what government is doing. Yes, we acknowledge there's the negatives, the red marks, but throughout the process, we also have civil society, and we need to step into that little space as well.
Bradley, I wonder if, or let me say this. In listening to all of you, there is, the question that arises is whether there is enough collaborative work, right? Because there are, and I've worked in the civil society space, and there are those that work in silos, there are those that collaborate with each other, there are those that believe that they know, right? And there are those that could benefit from the knowledge of others. And also collectively come up with a solution. Because what is clear in all of this and what we're talking about, and I'm going to take this to the break and then we can all collectively speak to it, starting with yourself, Bradley. We've identified there's a deep historical issue. There is the reality in terms of the socioeconomic conditions. There are the different contributing factors to what is. And in order to deal with it, it is not a one-stream approach. It is not just what the forum is doing. It is not just what Balls and Guns are doing, Balls Not Guns are doing. It's not the trauma only that is needed. So a multidisciplinary approach to what is, and are we doing that? Let's take the states aside, because the police not working with social development, not working with economic development, that's a reality. But here as a collective, from the media to civil society to psychologists, are we working with each other to deal with this challenge? And I'll put that as a question to conclude after the break. It's 10 minutes to 10.
The Full Circle with Bridget Masinga.
You were giving us the positives of South Africa.
I was sharing about how in some indicators, South Africa performs at a world-class level with some of the best countries in the world. So I had mentioned one of them was in terms of logistics competence. Another one where South Africa does really well is the transparency indicator. So this is where we look at how transparent governments are in terms of their public procurement, policy making, laws and data, or budget information.
Dinesh Naidu, who's the Director of Knowledge at the Chandler Institute of Governance.
The Full Circle with Bridget Masinga. Monday to Friday, 1 to 3 p.m. The Meeting Point on SAFM.
9 minutes before we conclude the meeting point, and I will give our guests final word on that question that I put, but not before we get to two voice notes that we have received on this discussion. 0614-104-107. These are your voice notes.
Koketso, everyone, and SFM listeners, Prince Durban. Koketso, man, the conditions, Koketso, the living conditions is the problem, Koketso. Informal settlements, Koketso. Such places only breathe poison, you know. That is why it is classified as inhuman living conditions. Yet we are expecting humans to come out of it as a result. No, it's impossible, only animals, only creatures would be a result of such conditions, just as we see.
The Cape Flats seem to be a world of its own. It sounds like a war zone down there, and I'm advising that maybe that the government should deploy the army down there so that innocent people's lives could be saved. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you very much. The voice notes really summarizing a lot of what we've touched on. Very briefly, to go back to the question of collaboration or not, the responsibility that we take as a media civil society in the absence of the state or with an absent state. Bradley, briefly.
Collaboration is non-existence within the MPO sector, community activists, because it's become an entitlement. It is mine. This is my little baby. You can't have a piece of this cake. All those kind of things. And that is the saddest part about it. I don't want to work with Koketso because he's going to steal my shine. I don't want to work with Dr. Shahida because she's too clever for me. So I'd rather keep her at a bay so that I can get some shine. Whereas if I collaborate with her, I get the understanding of a different side of how to approach the root cause problems and how to deal with it. So,
yeah. Albie?
Yeah, I would concur with Bradley. And I think that is the harsh reality that we faced within our communities, that, you know, we don't get that collaborative approach from civil society, broad civil society movement. As you correctly said it, let's leave the state there. But in terms of collaboration, we need to be able to share information, and we need to be able to work with one another. And I think that's the lacking part, because each and everyone is in their own little zone and trying to do their little bit in their little zone. So once we start looking at a collaborative approach, I'm sure that we'll be able to turn the tide around.
Dr. Shahida?
Well, I think that, so if I could, you know, I guess I work with men because I needed to prove society wrong, you know, that men actually are very good bonders. And so perhaps this is where I could put my teeth in, is how do we in fact bring together a strategy and to implement, to bring all these do-gooders together so that we can actually start practically forming a way in which the people who are just in the little corners actually come together.
Marguerite?
So yes, we can talk a lot about how we can work together, but I always, for me, the question I challenge myself constantly, how can we as stakeholders and organizations and projects put the community in the center of development, that we focus on the community and strengthen what they're already doing. Because communities, because every space has their own dynamics, and communities understand the lived reality. People who live in a specific community, they understand the lived reality. Like this gentleman was speaking about the conditions in which they live, you know, so heartbreaking to hear that, and it's so true, you know. Let us see how we can work together, but putting community in the center of development. That is my wish and my prayer for us today.
Really appreciate it. Sia? You have occupied this corner. You have the final word.
Of course. I'm a bit, I'm 50-50 when it comes to it. I think, yes, we do have collaboration that's taking place. I take it from my experience in working at Ilitera Bando, part and parcel of why we've had the longevity of having 36 years as an organization is our ability to work in partnership with different stakeholders, whether that will be other civil society organizations, government, and, you know, the community as a whole. I think it's 50-50, and that also requires a certain level of activism. Remember, we are activists before anything. You can't be in this space and not think that you are not going to be active in your response to try and bring about change in your community. And the other 50 that I wanted to bring upon this discussion is that the conditions that civil society is operating in makes it difficult for them to even collaborate. The lack of resources that are there, you know, the lack of funding, you know, so they're all competing for the same coin, So obviously they're going to be more competitive in terms of them not wanting to collaborate because they now see each other as competitors rather than being partners in the fight against whatever social ill that's taking place. So it's, for me, it's 50-50, but I always encourage that there's always time for collaboration. Even here, when we move out of this space, this is a time for us to actually exchange numbers so that we can actually work together beyond this space. It's not just a talk show. It's about creating a greater sense of activism, and that's what's required now in our communities.
I appreciate... Come on. Honestly, I appreciate you all for saying yes. There are many areas that we have not touched on. This is a broad subject. Lots of depth, and maybe hopefully we can explore some of it moving forward. But thank you very much. Thank you to Siabulela Managali, Communications Manager and Head of Education and Outreach at Lita Labantu. Thank you to Marguerite Holzhausen, Executive Director at the Trauma Center for Survivors of Violence and Torture. Bradley Johannesson of the community activists and also doing work with Balls Not Guns, really appreciate it. Thank you very much to Albie Isaacs, Chairperson of the K-Fly Safety Forum. Thank you to Dr. Shahida Jansen. Go and get the book, Masculinity Meets Humanity, an adapted model of masculinized psychotherapy, and also in absentia, thank you very much to Major General Jeremy Vieri. There was a time where I said this needs to be done. A number of people came together to say yes. I want to thank the team that has pulled it off, to Zanele, Ntabiseng, Leanda, Phineas, Linda, Jordan, Yanda, Vusani, Chad, Leanda, Usipile, Nelson. This has been an incredible production, and I really appreciate it. Thank you very much. It's 10 o'clock, time for the latest news with Greg Host. Have a good evening.
Koketso Sachane condemns Mkhwanazi's media comments and road accident funds financial statements in the spotlight. Good evening. National Editors Forum SANEFs condemned the request by the KwaZulu-Natal Police Commissioner Njanja Mkhwanazi that the ad hoc committee, as well as the Joint Standing Committee on Intelligence, tasked the state security apparatus to conduct a counter-intelligence investigation against the South African news media. In a statement, SANEFs described the comments by Mkhwanazi on Tuesday at the Parliamentary Ad Hoc Committee probing allegations of threats to national security as an attack on media freedom. SANEF says Mkhwanazi doubled down on his stance today and called for the imprisonment of journalists and heavy penalties for those who err in their reporting. Here's part of Mkhwanazi's comments today.
There's been a lot of pushback indirectly through the journalist. A lot of media stories written. Some of those journalists that wrote bad things, they are starting to change their tune now. And they start connecting the dots themselves, which is interesting for me because, well, if they made a mistake, they must acknowledge that and be objective about things.
A parliamentary inquiry has heard that the Road Accident Fund deviated in its role as a social benefit entity when calculating its financial statements for the past 3 financial years. Instead, the entity acted similar to a private insurance company. This was revealed by the CEO of the Accounting Standards Board, Janine Pagliani, at the parliamentary inquiry into the financial affairs of